Hey, yo, what's up, you guys? Welcome back to the channel. This is Smart TCG, and today I'm going to be going over my tier list heading into Louisville regionals this weekend. Louisville is going to be happening this weekend, going to be a major regional championship with over 2,000 players, and we're going to be going over where I think the metagame is going to shape up and what decks you should be playing. So, with that being said, if you enjoy the content, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. And if you want to make a tier list of your own, make sure to go check out the description. The link will be down there. All right, hopping into it, we're going to start off with some of the most talked about decks recently and where I think they stand. We're going to start off with Trapos Dusknoir. Trapos Dusknoir has been getting a ton of talk, has been seeing success in online tournaments toward Reklev, did get 9th place at Dortmund as well, and I think it's very, very respectable, very powerful deck. We're going to put it in tier A as of right now. Makes a very good play for this event. Doesn't necessarily consistently beat everything, but it does pretty well against mostly everything. It has a very balanced matchup spread, and pretty much all of its matchups become favored if you are able to go first. This is a deck that really is able to capitalize on winning the coin flip and going first. You feel pretty good against mostly everything. I think this deck is going to be played around 10 to 12%. I think that it is going to take up a pretty large percentage of the format. I don't think it'll be the most played deck, but I definitely think it deserves to be one of the most played. It's a great deck, very good against a lot of things. I think it's going to see success for sure. It does take one other thing I wanted to mention, it does take a pretty scary matchup versus Regidrago. So if Regidrago spikes up in play, then that's something you have to be kind of concerned about as a Trapos player, as that matchup can get very rough very quickly. But when you're able to go first, you can pretty much beat anything pretty convincingly. Next up here, we got Lugia. Lugia is a deck that has been seeing a big resurgence recently. I know that Rahul has been seeing a lot of success with it, a lot of other Lugia players as well. Kieran Farr got 2nd place at Baltimore, and yeah, the deck is doing absolutely phenomenally. I'm going to put Lugia here in tier A as well. I think it makes a very good play. The only reason why it's not in tier S is just because of itself. It doesn't set up as much as it would like, but when it gets set up, it definitely is a tier S deck. It beats mostly everything when it gets going. That's just the big question mark. Can it actually get going? Next up here, we're going to go over Palkia Dusknoir, as this is a deck that I think is really underrated in this format. I think it's really powerful, definitely can beat most things, and I think it's a lot better than people give it credit for. I'm going to put it in tier B as of right now. I think the deck is very, very good. I think it takes a lot of solid matchups. The only problem with the deck is its Raging Bolt matchup is relatively unfavored from my testing. So that's honestly the only thing that I feel like is holding it back, is that its Raging Bolt matchup is not very good. Whereas, Trapos oftentimes does similar things to Palkia, but has a significantly better Raging Bolt matchup. So that's, kind of, I think the major difference is that Palkia just takes a rough Raging Bolt matchup, whereas, Trapos takes a relatively solid one. So I think it's good. I definitely think it's going to see success. I just don't think a whole lot of people are going to play it. I think some people kind of forget about the deck, but I think it's a lot better than people think. Next up here, we got Raging Bolt. We're going to put Raging Bolt in tier B. Its matchup spread overall is not necessarily amazing. However, it's always a terrifying deck to play against because it's incredibly aggressive. It's very consistent and is able to oftentimes win the game on the very first turn. You have things like, Pokemon Catcher, which is a, very volatile card that can, save you or just, completely lose your game if you aren't, flipping well on them. So I think the deck is good. I don't think it's amazing, but I think that it has the ability to beat pretty much everything just because it's so consistent. So if I was playing Raging Bolt to this tournament, I would not play any tech cards. Don't tech for pretty much anything. I wouldn't play, like Bravery Charms. I would, max out my trekking shoes and just build the fast and most consistent list possible. You could even consider cutting something like Radiant Greninja. I have seen some lists, kind of start to do that. That's been something that I'm kind of considering because Radiant Greninja is kind of a liability, versus the Dusknoir variant. So that's something you could potentially do. But yeah, Raging Bolt's solid. Its matchup spread isn't incredible, but it takes advantage of a lot of decks that stumble against it. Next up here, we have Regidrago. Regidrago has been seeing a little bit of a resurgence recently. Did see success in Dortmund. There were a couple in top 16. And I think it's a decent deck. We're going to put it in tier B. It has major problems against Raging Bolt and Lugia, which are kind of the things that are holding the deck back. However, you do pretty good against most of the Dusknoir variants. That's one of the big things that Regidrago has going for it. Your matchup against Trapos is pretty solid. Your matchup against, Palkia Dusknoir is pretty solid. Your Charizard and your Dragapult matchup are also very decent as well. So you do sacrifice a couple of matchups and take really rough ones to those. However, you do have a lot, going for it. I might end up putting this at the very bottom of tier A, but I think it definitely deserves its spot at least at the top of tier B. I think it's going to do well, and I definitely think it makes a decent pick. But you do have to accept the fact that your Lugia matchup and your Raging Bolt matchup just are not very good. All right, hopping into Charizard here. I think Charizard is a tier A deck. I don't think, after playing some more games with the deck, I don't think it's at the top of tier A, but I definitely think it's still a very, very powerful deck. I most recently did a top 5 list of like the strongest decks in the format, and I did have it at number 1, but after playing a couple games with it, with a lot more of the Dusknoir variants, showing up, I was running into a couple problems against them. I felt like I was kind of getting like overwhelmed a little bit, but Charizard is still Charizard. It's still very good. The ultimate safe pick, for tournaments. You're playing a fundamentally very powerful deck, and I definitely think you can see success with it. The question is can Charizard go the distance anymore? And, we haven't seen it just yet. I think that it has the ability to win tournaments, but the meta has been a little bit hostile, towards it at the moment. But I still think it's good. It does everything well. It doesn't do necessarily anything exceptionally great, but it does everything well. And I think that's the reason as to why I'm going to put it in tier A. It's not going to be at the top of tier A, but it'll be at the bottom, but I think it's still very solid. Next up here, we have Iron Thorns. Iron Thorns is quite a interesting deck right now. I'm going to put it in tier B here. I would say that you do take obviously an incredible matchup against Lugia. Your Charizard matchup is phenomenal. Your matchup against Regidrago is okay. However, your matchup against Trapos is not very good, and that's the big issue, especially with Trapos lists playing things like Energy Lotto. Some of them are also playing Colorus as well. Actually, plenty of them are playing Colorus. Those are cards that are very difficult for Iron Thorns to deal with, because as long as they're able to find their double turbo and also Vitality Band, you can run into some issues. So I think Iron Thorns is still solid. Definitely think it's better into this event than it has been in the past, but you do have some problems against some matchups, and you are oftentimes playing coin flip like roulette with things like Crushing Hammers. You can kind of live and die by those cards a lot of the time, but I think it's a solid deck for sure. Next up, we got Miraidon. I'm going to put Miraidon in tier D at the moment. Unfortunately, I'm sorry. Miraidon lovers. I think that Raging Bolt is just stronger in pretty much fundamentally every single way. So Miraidon's going to go down in D. I would not recommend playing this deck to this tournament. If you want to play a turbo deck, I would recommend playing Raging Bolt or potentially Roaring Moon. I think those decks both do kind of what Miraidon wants to do, but a little bit more efficiently. Another big issue with Miraidon is your Charizard matchup's not great, and neither is your Trapos matchup. So I definitely would focus on some of the other turbo decks. Next up here, we have Turbo Roaring Moon. We're going to put Turbo Roaring Moon and see. I think it's just a decent deck. You could potentially play it with the Dusknoir Darkrai package. That's currently how I like to play the deck. Very, very cool combos that you can pull off. It's just an average turbo deck. I think that Raging Bolt is a little bit better overall. And yeah, but it's fun. It's definitely a cool deck. The big problem though is the Zard matchup, because when you have to use Frenzy Gouging, you have to damage yourself, and then they just hit you with, a Dusclops or a Dusknoir, and things can kind of collapse very quickly as they can take big 4-prize turns. So I think that both these turbo decks I would potentially stay away from, and maybe look a little bit more into playing Raging Bolt as the turbo deck of choice. Next up here, we have Palkia Noctowl. I think Palkia Noctowl is a tier C deck. It's just average. It doesn't necessarily do anything great. I think the better Palkia variant is the Dusknoir variant, as you can take multiple prize cards in one turn with the Dusknoirs. I think that, Palkia Noctowl doesn't really do a whole lot better than a lot of the other decks, that I feel like are able to one-shot. For example, you're pretty much just playing a deck that can one-shot most things, but, Raging Bolt can do the same thing. Like Lugia can do the same thing. The only really benefit you have is access to Radiant Greninja. That's really the only thing you have going for it, but so does, Palkia Dusknoir. And if you need a one-shot thing, you can just pop a Dusknoir. So I don't think Palkia Noctowl is great. It's just a decent deck. It does everything okay, nothing really good, though. It's just very, very average and, very middle of the road. Next up here, we have Trapos, Pidgeot. This, I assume, is just going to be the more tanky build. This is probably just a tier C deck, just more of the penny build, I'm going to assume. I think that the Dusknoir variant is just better pretty much in every single way. I definitely would focus on playing the Dusknoir variant. I mean, the Dusknoir variant also, for what it's worth, plays a 1-1 Pidgeot line. You can even play 2-2 if you want that. So if you want to play a heavier count of Pidgeot, you can definitely just add it into, add it into Trapos Dusknoir. So anyways, I'm just not going to include this because I think that this is kind of the same deck. So we're not going to include Trapos Pidgeot. All right, Pidgeot Control. We'll put in tier C. We'll probably put it at top of tier C. Its Lugia matchup is atrocious. Your matchup against all the Dusknoir decks are actually kind of scary. I don't think your Terapagos Dusknoir matchup is very good. The Regidrago matchup has always kind of been close. Kind of depends on what, tech cards they play. I think it's a fine deck. I don't think that stall and control is as good as it used to be, especially in this format with Lugia seeing so much more success. So I would potentially, stray away from Pidgeot, but I wouldn't be surprised to see one do well. Next up, we have Snorlax. Snorlax is going to go in tier... probably... Where do I want to put this? I think we'll put it at the bottom of tier B. I think it's still okay. I just kind of prefer Snorlax over, Pidgeot, as I think your Zard matchup is stronger. Your Terapagos matchup also feels a little bit better as well. And also your Regidrago matchup feels better. Pretty much all your Dusknoir matchups, in my opinion, feel a little bit better. So I do prefer Snorlax stall at the moment. I've played a few games with it in this format, and it does feel okay. The problem is your Lugia matchup is atrocious, but now potentially you could play 4 Temple of Sinnoh. I have seen some people kind of thinking about playing Heavy Temple to help out versus the Terapagos matchup, and it also kind of in tune helps out against the Lugia matchup, so you could potentially do that. Next up, we have Dragapult Pidgeot. I think Dragapult Pidgeot is tier 1 as well. Very solid deck. I think we'll put it right above Charizard. They're both very, very close. They're very similar decks. However, I think that just being able to pull off those, crazy turns, take so many prize cards seems very, very solid overall. I think its matchup against the Lugia might be slightly better as well. I think Charizard, if you play against a Lugia that pops off against you, there's not really a whole lot that you can do, but I think Dragapult definitely has a shot against it. They both do very similar things, but yeah, I think they're both very close. You could kind of just, interchange them, but yeah, I think that Dragapult's a tier 1 deck. Definitely very, very good. Definitely respect it. Next up, we got Gardevoir. Gardevoir is probably a tier... Probably bottom of... It's probably here. I'll put it right here. I think Gardevoir is okay. Its matchup against Terapagos is a major problem. Its matchup against Lugia, if you don't play tech cards, is also pretty rough. And all the Dusknoir variants are just really difficult for this deck because it can get very easily overwhelmed on the second turn of the game where they just lose all their Curlius. So at the moment, I think Gardevoir is not amazing. I think the Henry Chow variant might be the one you need to go with that plays rare candies to try and give you a chance, versus, these Dusknoir variants. But it just seems like there's so much you have to fight through. It just seems there's so much you have to fight through as a Gardevoir player. So at the moment, I think it's definitely the weakest it's been in quite some time, and we're going to put it down there. But anyways, that is going to do it for my tier list. These are currently where I would put the decks in the format. There's no tier S deck. I don't think that we have a far and away strongest deck in the format. It's the very beginning of the format, so we need a little bit of time to kind of see, from these tournaments where things kind of stand. For example, if there's 8 Lugia in top 8s, then maybe for the next one we put it up into tier S, right? It just kind of depends. We just need a little bit more data to see what is far and away the strongest decks. But anyways, this is currently what I would be playing. I think that tier A are the strongest decks overall heading into the tournament. Tier B are decks that I think are very good as well. Specifically the top of tier B are decks that I think are, pretty solid plays. And then the lower end of tier B are decks that are pretty decent, but you have to be pretty careful about them as they do have major flaws in this format. And then tier C are decks that I wouldn't be surprised to see some success, but definitely have a lot of flaws and a lot of problems in specific matchups. And then we have tier D as well with Miraidon. Honestly, if you wanted to, you could just move down all 3 of these. If you kind of want to separate them a little bit and then just do this, I'm totally fine also, doing something like this. But anyways, that is going to do it for this video today. If you enjoy the content, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. And with that being said, this is Smart TCG, and I'll speak with you guys again soon. Peace out.